There are places in the landscape that have stood as monuments through time, watching as history passes them by and often influencing the landscape around them. We have a duty to use these as a source of knowledge, a connection to the past, and a way to develop our future. But what if they can have a great impact on our present? Can these historical monuments and landscapes really impact me and this community in such a way? As an archaeologist, I'm very interested at looking at the people who came before us. We have always been human, and no matter what, had the same basic needs and desires. That is something that I believe makes us fundamentally human. But within prehistory, we lack the written record to show this connection. But as the saying goes, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? As archaeologists, we don't hear the sound, but we search for the echo. Now let me take you back to the Mesolithic, or the Middle Stone Age. This period began 12,000 years ago, when Britain began to be repopulated after the last ice age. It lasted an incredible 6,000 years until the introduction of farming and the Neolithic, or Late Stone Age. This is the period that began the building of some of Britain's most iconic monuments, like Stonehenge. Stonehenge began construction 4,900 years ago, but it didn't have something similar to its iconic stone configuration until 400 years later. It was then added and adapted to throughout the Bronze Age to get to something like we see today. It is crucial to think about Stonehenge within its landscape of monuments and not as a singular entity, to really understand why people built it. To be honest, we don't really know why people built it or what it was used for, but many people have many different ideas. Some believe that it's a temple for the dead, especially as cremated remains have been found within it. Others believe it's an astrological temple, as the winter solstice alignment is undeniable, and you could really imagine people travelling through the landscape to celebrate the end of winter and the beginning of spring. But why is it placed where it is? Well, 2 trees fell 2 kilometres apart, and that began the journey of this incredible landscape to the World Heritage Site we see today. Now, the trees are what really interest me. I'm great fun at parties, but 2 kilometres away from Stonehenge, a spring line close to the River Avon has produced the earliest residential and occupation site in this World Heritage Site. This has changed our understanding of the birth of this incredible landscape. This is Bleak Mead. It is evident that Bleak Mead was an important cultural location, as the carbon date range here spreads an incredible 4,000 years. Not only does this transcend the introduction of farming and the first Neolithic monuments in the landscape, but also the first monuments found in the landscape to 3 posts on what would later become the Stonehenge car park. Now, these are unusual within the Mesolithic period, and they share a connection to Bleak Mead because, you guessed it, they both have 2 fallen trees, much like this one that's found on Kingbarrow Ridge overlooking Stonehenge. I'm looking very excited there. Much like this one, at Bleak Mead, they would have utilised the root wall and the root hollow created to create a structure. Here's a reconstruction I've produced of what I believe this camp would have looked like. You can see the spring line and a cobbled flint surface that they built alongside it, which had ceremonially placed oryx hooves within it. These were a breed of wild cattle that lived on the Salisbury Plains. I also believe that they would have used the hides for these to cover the shelter. Now you can see in the entrance, there's a hearth. Now it doesn't seem sensible to have a fire right where you're trying to get into your building. But from the evidence, we think that they would have heated the coals outside and transferred them in so that you would reduce the risk of a fire spreading. But what's more interesting about this hearth is that it's an earlier tree throw hollow. And we know that they would have known what it was because it had a ceremonially placed axe at the base. Now, not only are the radiocarbon dates found here amazing, but so are the finds, because they really tell a story about the humans that inhabited this space. These are people like us. These are people who were only a couple of generations from those that built Stonehenge. Maybe they came here because of these pink flints, a phenomenon found in the spring at Bleak Mead. Because of a rare type of algae present, after they've been submerged and then dried, they turn this amazing hue. We have to think that this may have been the only place in Britain at that time where you could have seen this colour. Isn't that amazing? How far would you have travelled to see this phenomenon? Because people were obviously travelling from far and wide to get here. Because otherwise, how would a sandstone tool, probably from the West Midlands, a slate version of a flint Horsham point, probably from Devon, and a work sarsen, probably from the Marlborough Downs, all end up at Bleak Mead? Well, the answer showing just how far people travelled to get to Bleak Mead came from a single dog's tooth. This tooth depicted the oldest journey of man and his best friend from somewhere like Yorkshire down to Bleak Mead. Now, this was definitely a hunting dog and not a handbag Yorkshire Terrier. But its journey as a domestic dog shows the origins of its human companions. How much further people were travelling to get to Bleak Mead is unknown, but it's obvious that it was an important cultural location to share ideas, objects, and possibly genes. Could Cheddar Man, whose DNA was analysed earlier this year, have travelled from somewhere like Somerset to Bleak Mead, possibly to hunt these wild oryx and feast on them? I think that that's probably incredibly likely, as this was obviously an important meeting place where people travel from across the country, as people travel from across the world today to discover the secrets that Bleak Mead holds. Now, when I began writing this, I thought that the idea worth sharing was that of these two trees falling being the birth of this incredible landscape. But then I realised it's not. This, the first place in the Stonehenge landscape, would not have been found without its community support. The Bleak Mead dig came from humble origins when, in its first few years, it lasted only a weekend a year with a £500 budget. It was on the goodwill of the local community who dedicated their time, money, and skills that built the dig to what we see today. These were people with no archaeological training who just wanted to be a part of their local community instead of watching yet another TV programme about it. And 10 years on, some of these people have created careers out of archaeology, and others manage specific areas of the site each year. What's more impressive is that 90% of the residents of Amesbury voted to have their taxes rise so that a purpose-built building would be erected, showing finds from Bleak Mead. And nearly 6 years ago, the first exhibition of these finds was found in what would later become the Amesbury History Centre. Alongside them, the Amesbury Museum and Heritage Trust sort out the volunteer workforce and health and safety for the dig each year. But more importantly, they organise community events so that people can celebrate their ancestral connection to Bleak Mead. Community events like the Lantern Parade, held on the winter solstice each year, so that people can travel through the landscape to Bleak Mead for a ceremony. But this doesn't really show the impact that the volunteers have on the finds. We have to think back to the pink flints, This phenomenon would not have been found without a volunteer. One person just thought that they saw an interesting flint in the spring and picked it up to show an expert later on. When they got to the point to show the expert, it had miraculously turned pink. And without one woman's curiosity, we would never have found possibly the reason that people were travelling to this landscape, possibly the reason that Stonehenge is placed where it is. Now, the spirit of Bleak Mead is amazing. And the way that the community have got behind their heritage is inspiring. In the modern world, it can be hard to just stop and think about the heritage that surrounds us, but it can be a rewarding perspective to think about. Clapham has an amazing heritage, beginning as a small Saxon village called Clapham in the 5th century AD, to the town that fought to abolish slavery. Clapham has literally changed the world, with William Wilberforce and his group of local men fighting to challenge society's accepted morality and bring about the end of slavery. Could the name Clapham have come from wealthy Dane Osgood Clapper, whose daughter's local wedding feast saw King Harthacnut die from excessive drinking? On a Saturday night, it doesn't seem like that much has changed here. But what else could be discovered? And how could that change your community for the better? So stand up. Take ownership of your shared local heritage, because it is us, the communities, who have built these stories across centuries. It is our responsibility to protect these, to build new stories and new communities. So go to your local museum, volunteer at an archaeological dig, and visit historical properties, because you don't know what you may discover, and you don't know how that could inspire you. Because from tiny acorns, mighty oaks grow. Thank you.